This study material is to be used in order to assist with preparation for the FAA Powerplant oral exam as it pertains to the Aircraft Maintenance Technician certification, also known as an A&P mechanic. The questions used as study material are those by A&P Fastrack located in Bethany, Oklahoma. I will read the question, pause for approximately 3 to 5 seconds, then read the answer. Let's begin. What procedure should be followed when valve blow-by is indicated by a hissing sound on a reciprocating engine when pulling the propeller through? Perform a cylinder compression test to identify the faulty cylinder. What is the running valve clearance on engines equipped with hydraulic valve lifters? 0. When troubleshooting a running engine malfunction, what does a cold cylinder indicate? Lack of combustion in that cylinder. What factors about the condition of an engine can be learned by studying the results of a compression test? The results of a compression test determine if the valves, piston rings, and pistons are adequately sealing. What should be done to repair a loose stud in an engine crankcase? Remove the loose stud and inspect the hole for size and the condition of the threads. It may be necessary to use a suitable oversized stud. How is a cylinder barrel inspected for out of roundness? A dial indicator, or a telescopic gauge and micrometer, or an inside micrometer, can be used to measure at the top of the cylinder and at the skirt. 2 readings should be taken, 90 degrees to each other. What types of connecting rods are commonly found in radial engines? Master and articulated rod assemblies. What are the different types of piston rings? Compression, oil control, and oil scraper. What is the purpose of oil control rings? Oil control rings regulate the thickness of the oil film on the cylinder wall. What types of bearings are in general use in reciprocating engines? Plain, ball, and roller. Where are cracks most likely to be found in a piston? Highly stressed areas, the base of the pin bosses, inside at the junction of the head walls, and the ring lands. How are piston ring gaps installed relative to each other on a piston, and why? Compression ring gaps should be installed in staggered positions, not aligned, around the piston in order to prevent excessive blow-by. What is the purpose of valve overlap? It permits better volumetric efficiency and lowers the cylinder operating temperature. What is the purpose of crankshaft dynamic dampers? To reduce engine vibration. What is meant when it is said that an engine part is within serviceable limits? A part that is within serviceable limits will not likely wear to the point of causing engine failure within the next timer between overhaul, TBO, interval. Name at least one part of an inspection that should be made after a propeller strike, not sudden stoppage. Inspect the engine mounts, crankcase, and nose section for damage. Inspect the oil and oil screens, filters, for metal particles. Inspect the propeller drive shaft or crankshaft for misalignment. What are some of the precautions to be observed when preparing an aircraft for engine removal? Disconnect the battery, chock the wheels, install a tail stand, if needed, and turn off the fuel valves. What is an indication that a primer is leaking or is open during engine operation? The engine will not idle properly. What may be the result of incorrect installation of piston rings? Excessive oil consumption. What are some indications of induction system leakage? Low power and uneven running. When an engine is rebuilt by the manufacturer, how is its operating history affected? A rebuilt engine is considered to have no previous operating history and can therefore be issued a zero-time record. What is used in an aircraft engine to help prevent valve surge or float from occurring? 2 or more springs on each valve. Turbine engines. What are the major components of a typical gas turbine engine? An air inlet, compressor section, combustion section, turbine section, exhaust section, and accessory section. What determines the amount of air passing through a turbine engine? Compressor speed, forward speed of the aircraft, and air density. What are the 2 principal types of compressors currently used in turbine engines? Centrifugal and axial flow. How are turbine engine rotor blades attached to rotor discs? Name at least 2 methods. Bulb type root, fir tree type root, or dovetail type root. Name at least 3 types of combustion chamber systems. Can, annular, canannular, and reverse flow annular. What is the purpose of the interconnect tubes attached between can-type combustion chambers? For flame propagation during starting. What prevents burning of combustion chambers? Cooling air along the inside of the liner. What is a unique feature of a split dual compressor system? 2 rotor shafts, one inside the other. What are carbon seals used for in turbine engines? As oil seals for the rotor shaft bearings. What are the desired effects of turbine engine compressor field cleaning? Removal of contaminant deposits from interior engine surfaces and improved engine performance. What is the main operating difference between turbofan and turbojet engines? The air that flows through the fan section of a turbofan engine bypasses or flows around the outside of the core engine instead of through it. What methods are commonly used to accomplish turbine engine compressor field cleaning? Fluid wash and abrasive grit blast. Name an advantage of a turbofan over a turbojet. Additional thrust without increasing fuel flow. What are the functions of axial flow turbine nozzles? They prepare the mass airflow for driving the turbine rotor and deflect the gases to a specific angle. What are some ways of relieving thermal stress on a turbine disc? By directing bleed air onto the face of the disc, or by the grooving in the turbine disc. What type of compressor blade damage may be found when inspecting compressor blades? Dents, galling, pitting, cracks, scratches, burrs, burns, and gouges. What is used to mark both hot and cold section parts for repair? Layout die, commercial felt tip marker, or chalk. What is the effect of relative humidity on turbojet or turbofan power? It's negligible. What may be the indications if a turbojet or turbofan engine is out of trim? The engine has high exhaust gas temperature at the target engine pressure ratio for takeoff power. What would the possible cause be for a turbojet or turbofan engine having high exhaust gas temperature, low RPM, and high fuel flow at all engine pressure ratio settings? Possible turbine damage or loss of turbine efficiency. Engine inspection. What functions need to be accomplished to prepare an engine for a 100-hour inspection? Remove the cowling and clean. How may an engine be visually identified? By the engine data plate. What may be used as a guide for 100-hour inspections on aircraft engines? 14 CFR Part 43, Appendix D. What additional inspection must be performed if a cylinder compression is weak? An internal cylinder inspection. Name at least one place where engine operating limitations may be found. Type certificate data sheets, engine specification, engine manual, aircraft manufacturer's maintenance manual. How does an oil analysis program help to evaluate the internal condition of an engine? By identifying each wear metal and the quantity present in the oil. Name at least one type of FAA approval required when a change to an engine type design is not enough to require a new type certificate. A supplemental type certificate, a field approval under a minor change in type design. Why should a reciprocating engine be inspected when it is removed from storage after having been preserved? To determine whether it has sustained corrosion damage. What publication is needed to inspect an engine for conformity with specifications? The engine specifications or type certificate data sheet. What publication is needed to check an engine for normal operation? The manufacturer's maintenance manual. What is the purpose of a hot section inspection of a turbine engine? To determine the integrity of hot section components. Name at least one condition under which compliance with an aircraft engine service bulletin is mandatory. When it is a part of an airworthiness directive. When compliance is part of the approved operating specifications for a commercial operator. When engine or component overhaul procedures require compliance at the time of overhaul. What is fan blade shingling? Fan blade shingling is the overlapping of the mid-span shrouds of the fan blades. What publications are needed to perform a turbine engine overspeed inspection? Manufacturer's maintenance publications. What is required after a turbine engine experiences exhaust gas temperature exceeding limits? A hot section inspection. Name at least one place where a list of life-limited parts may be found. The type certificate data sheet, the airworthiness limitations section of the instructions for continued airworthiness. What criteria are used to determine the replacement of life-limited turbine engine components? Cycles, hours, or calendar time. What inspection should a mechanic accomplish during coast down after shutdown of a turbofan or turbojet engine? Listen for an audible rubbing sound or other unusual noises from the engine. When removing turbojet or turbofan turbine blades, why is it important that they be installed in the same location? To maintain the balance of the turbine wheel. What items must be included in the operational check of a reciprocating engine prior to approval for return to service after a 100-hour inspection? Power output, static and idle RPM, magnetos, fuel and oil pressure, cylinder and oil temperature. Engine instrument systems. In reference to a carbureted reciprocating engine, where is a fuel flow indicating system generally connected in an engine fuel system? Between the engine fuel pump and carburetor. What are the basic components of an engine fuel flow system? A transmitter and an indicator. What type of readout is indicated on a fuel flow system? The amount of fuel flow in pounds or gallons per hour. What is the fuel pressure range of float type carburetors? 3 to 5 psi. What is the reason for monitoring fuel flow? Fuel flow is an indication of fuel consumption and engine performance. What does a manifold pressure gauge indicate? Absolute manifold pressure in inches of mercury. What directly controls manifold pressure? Engine RPM and throttle opening. On an engine equipped with a fixed pitch propeller, what controls both manifold pressure and engine RPM? The throttle control. What does a reciprocating engine tachometer indicate? Engine crankshaft speed. What are turbine engine tachometer gauges designed to indicate? Percentage of compressor RPM. What does turbine engine exhaust gas temperature, EGT, indicate? It's the average temperature of turbine discharge gases. How is turbine engine EGT obtained? Usually by several thermocouples spaced at intervals around the exhaust duct perimeter near the turbine exit. What does turbine engine pressure ratio indicate? Thrust being developed by the engine. What pressures are measured to obtain engine pressure ratio? Total inlet pressure and total turbine exhaust pressure. What is the torque being developed by a turboprop engine an indication of? Shaft horsepower. Where should the thermocouple be installed on a single probe cylinder head temperature system? On the hottest cylinder. What is the electrical source for a cylinder head temperature system? A thermocouple. Where is the location of the carburetor air temperature bulb? It's located in the ram air intake duct. What is the possible cause when oil pressure drops off severely, oil supply remains full, and oil temperature is normal? Oil pressure transmitter or indicator is malfunctioning. How can a turbine engine EGT system be checked without running the engine? By checking the resistance of thermocouples and circuits. When checking the manifold pressure during engine operation, in what position would the prop control be set? Low pitch. Engine fire protection systems. Name at least 2 types of fire detector systems used for engine fire protection. Overheat, rate of rise, flame detectors. What will happen in a thermocouple fire warning system on an engine that overheats slowly? Nothing, because it takes a fast rate of rise or rapid heating to operate. What happens to a thermal switch fire protection system when it is heated enough to operate? Switch contacts close and provide a ground for the cockpit fire warning devices. What electrical power is needed for a thermocouple fire protection system? The aircraft electrical system and thermocouple produced voltage. What is the minimum number of thermal switch units needed for a thermal switch fire protection system? At least 1. What is a type of fire detection system that permits more complete coverage of an area than spot-type temperature detectors? A continuous loop system. What is the principle of operation of a KID continuous loop fire protection system? 2 wires are embedded in a special ceramic core within an inconel tube. 1 wire is a ground and the second wire is a hot lead that provides a current when the ceramic core material changes its resistance due to temperature. What is the principle of operation in a fin wall continuous loop fire protection system? A single wire is surrounded by ceramic beads in an inconel tube. The resistance is lowered when temperature rises. What is the purpose of a fire extinguishing system? To dilute the atmosphere around a fire with an inert agent that will not support combustion. What are 2 methods used to distribute fire extinguishing agents? Perforated tubing and/or discharge nozzles. What is an HRD fire extinguisher system? A fire extinguisher system with a high rate of discharge. How is an HRD fire extinguisher agent distributed? Open-end tubes. How long does it take to discharge an HRD agent? 1 to 2 seconds. What group of fire extinguishing agents are no longer being manufactured because of environmental concerns and are subject to strict handling and disposal regulations? Halons, or freon or chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs. What are the essential ingredients necessary for any fire to occur? Heat, or ignition source, fuel, and oxygen. What is the purpose of a discharge cartridge and how is it activated? The electrically operated discharge cartridge releases the fire extinguishing agent. What are the red and yellow discs associated with the fire extinguisher system used to indicate? Red indicates a thermal discharge and yellow indicates a normal discharge. What is likely to happen when an engine fire sensing loop is excessively kinked or bent? A false fire warning. What indicates low agent pressure in a container in a fire extinguisher system? A pressure gauge. What is the proper method for determining the fire extinguisher container pressure? Container gauge pressure used with the pressure temperature curve chart will indicate if the pressure is within limits. Engine electrical systems. Where are generator rating and performance data located? They are stamped on a nameplate attached to the generator. What does an ammeter load meter indicate when it is connected in the battery positive lead and the engine is operating? Whether the generator is supplying enough current to charge the battery or the battery is discharging. What does an ammeter load meter indicate when it is connected in the generator output lead and the engine is operating? The current leaving the generator, i.e., electrical system load. What is used to control DC generator voltage? Field current strength. What DC alternator system component prevents battery reverse current flow into the armature? The rectifier. Why are multiple generator systems paralleled? To ensure that each generator shares the load. How many phases are used in most aircraft AC alternator systems? 3. What determines the frequency of an alternator output? The speed of rotation of the rotor and the number of poles. How does a voltage regulator control the voltage of an alternator? By regulating the voltage output of the DC exciter. Name at least 2 methods that are used to maintain 400 Hz alternator output frequency on large turbojet turbofan engines. Constant speed drives, integrated drive generators, variable speed constant frequency, VSCF power systems. What are the major parts of a DC motor? The armature, field, brush, and frame. What are 3 types of DC motors? Series, shunt, and compound. What are the components of a direct cranking electric starter system? An electric motor, reduction gears, and an automatic engaging and disengaging mechanism. What are the operating modes of a turbine engine starter generator? It operates first as a starter, then as a generator after the engine is operating. What is the size standard for electrical wire used in U.S. manufactured aircraft? The American Wire Gauge, AWG. Which wire size is the largest? AWG 10 or AWG 14? AWG 10. What is the maximum slack allowed between the supports of a single wire or bundle installation? Not over ½ an inch. What kind of wire is used for wires running close to exhaust stacks or heating ducts? Wire with high temperature insulation material. What is an indication of a dirty, worn starter commutator? The starter drags. What is the purpose of bonding wires on power plant installations? To provide current return paths, prevent static discharge, and protect the aircraft and personnel from lightning discharge. What type of DC motor is commonly used for a reciprocating engine starter? A series wound motor. Why is a series wound motor commonly used as a reciprocating engine starter? Because it has a high starting torque under heavy load conditions. Lubrication systems. What is the primary purpose of an aircraft reciprocating engine lubricant? To reduce friction between moving parts. What are two important characteristics relating to viscosity that an engine oil must possess? It must be light enough to circulate freely and heavy enough to provide the proper oil film at engine operating temperatures. What is the most critical lubrication point in a gas turbine engine? The turbine bearing. What may happen to an oil that is too low in viscosity at engine operating temperatures? It is likely to become so thin that the oil film between moving parts is easily broken. What factors must an engine manufacturer consider in determining the proper grade of oil for an engine? Operating load, rotational speeds, and operating temperature. What is the function of a dispersant additive as contained in ashless dispersant oil? A dispersant helps keep an engine interior clean by keeping sludge forming contaminants in suspension in the oil until they can be trapped by the filter or drained out at oil change. Why must aircraft reciprocating engines use an oil with a relatively high viscosity? Aircraft engines have large operating clearances, high operating temperatures, and high bearing pressures. Why is an oil tank required to have expansion space? To provide for thermal expansion and air in the return oil. What is the purpose of an oil cooler bypass valve? An oil cooler bypass valve directs the oil through or around the oil cooler to keep the oil temperature within operating limits. Where does the oil temperature bulb usually sense oil temperature? At the engine oil inlet. What does the presence of metal particles in an engine oil filter indicate? Possible engine internal failure. Name at least two areas of a turbine engine oil system where oil screens filter may be located. Oil pressure system main filter, scavenge system, at or just before the oil jets, last chance. What are some oil contaminants? Moisture, acids, dirt, carbon, and metal particles. What type of oil is used in turbine engine oil systems? Synthetic oil. What could be the cause of excessive oil consumption without evidence of oil leaks in a reciprocating engine? Worn or broken piston rings. What would be an indication of inadequate oil supply? Low oil pressure and high oil temperature. What would be an indication of an obstruction in oil cooler passages? High oil temperature. What could cause oil foaming? Diluted oil, contaminated oil, and the oil level being too high. What are two types of turbine oil coolers? Air-cooled and fuel-cooled. What controls oil pressure in gear-type oil pressure pump? An oil pressure relief valve. What is the first thing to be done if metal particles are found in an engine oil filter? Evaluate the findings according to the manufacturer's maintenance instructions. Ignition and turbine engine starting systems. What is the purpose of a magneto? A magneto produces a high voltage that forces a spark to arc across a spark plug gap. What are the three major circuits of a high-tension magneto system? Magnetic, primary, and secondary. What are the components of a high-tension magnetic circuit? A permanent multipole rotating magnet, soft iron core, and pole shoes. In terms of the engine crankshaft position, when does the ignition event occur? A specified number of crankshaft degrees before top dead center on the compression stroke. Where is the E-gap position in a magneto? A few degrees beyond magnetic neutral. What is the purpose of the capacitor in a magneto? The capacitor prevents arcing at the points and aids in the collapsing of the magnetic field. What happens when a magnetic rotor is in the E-gap position and the primary breaker points open? The flow of current in the primary circuit stops and a high rate of flux change occurs in the core, inducing a pulse of high voltage in the secondary, or the spark plug fires. When an ignition switch is off in a magneto system, what is the condition of the ground circuit? The circuit to ground is completed. What is the purpose of using two magnetos in an engine's ignition system? System redundancy, safety factor, and improved combustion efficiency. Which magneto is grounded when the magneto switch is selected to the right magneto? The left magneto circuit. What are the three events required to fire a spark plug in a cylinder when its piston is in the prescribed position? Magneto in E-gap position, breaker points opening, and the distributor electrically aligned with that cylinder. What does a magneto timing light indicate? It indicates the exact instant that the magneto points open. What is the main concern when preparing a magneto for installation? Internal timing. Are turbine engine spark igniters generally susceptible to carbon fouling? Explain. No, because the high energy sparks they produce clean off any deposits that form on the firing end. The remaining service life of the brushes typically used in many starter generators can be determined by visual inspection of what? The amount of wear groove remaining on the brushes. What is the function of a duty cycle in relation to a turbine engine ignition system? A duty cycle allows the operation of the ignition system for a given amount of time to be followed by a minimum specified cooling down period. What are typically the three main components of turbine engine ignition systems? Ignition exciters, high tension leads, and igniters. Name three sources of high volume, low pressure compressed air commonly used for starting jet transport aircraft equipped with air turbine starters. An onboard auxiliary power unit, APU, a ground power unit, GPU, compressor bleed air from an already running engine. Between field and armature windings in starter generators, which ordinarily receive current for operation in the start mode? Generally, both the field and the armature receive current for operation in the start mode. Name two parts of a starter generator that commonly require periodic inspection to ensure that they do not wear beyond operational limits. The commutator and the brushes. Fuel metering systems. What are the two types of carburetors most commonly used on small reciprocating engines? Float type carburetors and pressure type carburetors. What is the function of a mixture control on float type carburetors? To control fuel air mixtures. What is the action of a float-type carburetor accelerating system when the throttle is opened with a quick action? A charge of fuel will enrich the mixture in the venturi. When does a carburetor economizer system needle valve begin to open? Above approximately 60 to 70% of rated power. What is the purpose of a carburetor economizer system? An economizer system provides additional fuel at high power settings for cooling the engine to prevent detonation. Where does a pressure injection carburetor obtain fuel pressure? From an engine-driven fuel pump. What operates an automatic mixture control? A sealed bellows that contracts or expands with a change in pressure and temperature. What position of a pressure injection carburetor manual mixture control would stop engine operation? Idle cutoff position. Name at least 3 advantages of direct fuel injectant systems over conventional carburetor systems. Less danger of induction system icing, improved acceleration, improved fuel distribution, reduced overheating of individual cylinders, better fuel economy. In a reciprocating engine, what problem is caused by an excessively rich mixture at idle? Spark plug fouling. What is the RPM indication when an idle mixture is set correctly and the mixture control is placed to the idle cutoff position? A slight rise in RPM prior to decreasing. Why should engine RPM be accelerated periodically when making carburetor adjustments? To clear the engine. What is the function of turbine engine fuel control units? To automatically satisfy fuel requirements of the engine. What are the 2 basic types of turbine engine fuel control units? Hydromechanical and electronic. Name at least 3 of the engine variables that may be detected by a turbine engine fuel control unit. Power lever position, engine RPM, compressor inlet temperature, compressor inlet pressure, compressor discharge pressure, burner pressure. What are 2 sources used in turbine engine fuel systems for fuel heating? Bleed air and engine lubrication oil. What turbine engine components inject fuel into the combustion area? Fuel spray nozzles. What is another type of fuel metering system used on reciprocating engines other than carburetors? Direct fuel injection. Depending on the engine, trimming is accomplished according to one of 2 types of engine indication. What are they? EPR, RPM. Name 2 major components of a supervisory electronic ignition control. Electronic control unit, computer. Hydromechanical fuel control. What are the maintenance adjustments normally allowed on an installed hydromechanical fuel control? Specific gravity for the fuel, idle RPM, and maximum RPM, or maximum EPR. Name at least 2 advantages of a full authority digital electronic control, FADEC, over a hydromechanical fuel control. Requires no engine trimming, improved engine starts, saves fuel, provides engine limit protection, provides constant idle speed with changes in atmospheric conditions and changing bleed air requirements, fully modulates the active clearance control, more repeatable engine transients. Engine fuel systems. What is the purpose of a turbine engine-driven fuel pump? To deliver a continuous supply of fuel at the proper pressure at all times. What are two categories of turbine engine fuel pumps? Constant and variable displacement. A gear type pump is classified in what category? Constant displacement. What keeps a dual element constant displacement fuel pump operating if one gear element seizes? A shear section of the drive shaft. What happens to excess fuel not required by an engine in a constant displacement pump? A pressure relief valve bypasses excess fuel. What type of fuel pump can vary the amount of fuel discharged regardless of speed? A variable displacement pump. What is the purpose of the pressurizing portion of a pressurizing and dump valve? To provide primary and secondary fuel flow to dual-line duplex fuel nozzles. What is the purpose of the dump portion of a pressurizing and dump valve? To drain fuel from the manifolds after engine shutdown. What type of engine-driven fuel pump is widely used other than gear and piston pumps? A rotary vane type. What is the purpose of fuel boost pumps? To supply fuel under pressure to engine-driven fuel pumps. What does the use of fuel boost pumps help prevent? Engine-driven fuel pump cavitation and vapor lock. What is a commonly used type of fuel boost pump? The centrifugal type. What are the causes of vapor lock? Low fuel pressure, high fuel temperature, and excessive fuel turbulence. Why is vapor lock serious? The fuel flow may be completely blocked. What are the purposes of main fuel strainers? To collect water and sediment and keep foreign matter out of the carburetor. What are the purposes of fuel selector valves? To provide a means for shutting off fuel flow for tank and engine selection, cross feed, and fuel transfer. What unit in a turbine engine fuel system is susceptible to the formation of ice? The fuel filter. What is the safety feature in an engine fuel system micron filter? A bypass valve. What methods are most often used to prevent ice in turbine engine fuel filters? A heat exchanger utilizing heat from engine bleed air or engine lubricating oil. What do the divided fuel flows of a turbine engine duplex fuel nozzle produce in the fuel? 2 spray patterns. What do you look for during external inspection of an engine-driven fuel pump? Leaks and security of mounting. Induction systems. What are the 3 units in a reciprocating engine induction system? A carburetor, air scoop, and intake manifold. What is the effect on engine performance when induction system icing occurs? Engine power loss and erratic operation. What are the 3 classifications of induction system ice? Impact ice, fuel evaporation ice, and throttle ice. What is the common method used to prevent induction system ice in reciprocating engines? Raising the temperature of induction air with a preheater. What causes fuel evaporation ice? Fuel evaporation ice is formed because of the decrease in air temperature resulting from evaporation of fuel after it is introduced into the airstream. When is carburetor throttle ice most likely to form due to throttle position? During part throttle operation, when the throttle is in a partly closed position. What are the two types of supercharged induction systems? Internally driven and externally driven. What is the function of a sonic venturi in a turbocharger system? To limit the amount of turbocharger airflow used for cabin pressurization. How and at what point does an internally driven supercharger boost air pressure? An impeller compresses the fuel-air mixture after it leaves the carburetor. From where does an externally driven supercharger derive its power? From the energy of engine exhaust gases directed against some form of turbine. What is the function of a turbocharger wastegate? It controls the volume of exhaust gas that is directed onto the turbine. What may be the indication of leaking intake pipes? The engine runs rough at low RPM. What may be the indication of an induction system obstruction? The engine fails to start or power is low. What may be the indication if a turbocharger wastegate will not fully close? The aircraft may not be able to reach critical altitude. What could be the probable cause of a turbocharged engine that surges? Wastegate or controller malfunction. What is used on many turbocharged engines for the wastegate actuator power? Oil pressure. What engine power indication will occur when carburetor heat is applied to an operating engine? A noticeable loss in engine power. What is the danger of applying carburetor heat with high engine power? Detonation. What is an indication of a dirty air inlet filter? Loss of power. How does divergent shaped jet engine inlet affect the air flowing to the engine when an airplane is in subsonic flight? It causes the air velocity to decrease and the air pressure to increase. Bellmouth inlet ducts are typically used on what type of aircraft? Helicopters. The Venturi type particle separator, found on many turbine-powered helicopters, utilizes what characteristic of matter to help remove debris from induction air? Inertia. Name two methods used for anti-icing of turbine engine inlet ducts. Engine bleed air, electric heating elements. Engine cooling systems. What are the three main reasons that excessive heat is undesirable in any reciprocating engine? It affects the behavior of combustion. It weakens and shortens the life of engine parts. It impairs lubrication. What is used to provide sufficient cooling surface area for air-cooled reciprocating engines? Cooling fins. What happens to waste engine heat after it is transferred to cylinder cooling fins? It is further transferred from the engine cylinders to the air. What should be done to a cylinder with excessive cooling fin area broken off? Replace the cylinder. What is the principal function of engine cowling and baffles? To direct airflow over the cylinders for cooling. What is used to control the amount of airflow through the cooling area of a reciprocating engine? Cowl flaps. What is an augmenter cooling system? It is an exhaust system incorporating inner and outer tubes that use that use exiting exhaust gas velocity to produce a Venturi effect to draw more airflow over the engine. What type of power is used to operate cowl flaps? Manual, electrical, hydraulic. Why do some aircraft use augmenters? To provide additional cooling airflow. Where should cowl flaps be positioned during ground operations? Fully open. What information must be consulted prior to reprofiling a cooling fin? The manufacturer's service or overhaul publications. What are the functions of engine cowling? It streamlines the engine area to reduce drag, and it forms an envelope around the engine to aid in controlling cooling airflow. What is the purpose of cowl air seals? They force air to circulate around and through the baffle system. Why is cowl flap adjustment important? The movement must be within tolerances to keep cylinder head temperatures within allowable limits. Where must most cooling air flow to cool a turbine engine? Through the inside of the engine. What areas of a turbine engine are cooled by air passing through the engine? The combustion chamber and turbine. What is the source of bleed air vented to turbine engine bearings and other parts in some engines? The engine compressor. What is the approximate percentage of air passing through a turbine engine that is used for cooling rather than combustion? 75%. What is the relationship between turbine engine upper temperature limits and power produced? The higher the combustion temperatures that an engine can withstand without damage, the more power it is capable of producing. How is compressor bleed air used to effectively allow higher gas temperatures in the turbine section of some engines? Bleed air from the compressor is ducted through hollow turbine section inlet guide vanes and hollow first stage rotor blades, keeping them cool enough to prevent heat damage. Engine exhaust systems. How are high temperature noxious gases removed and disposed of in an operating reciprocating engine? By the engine exhaust system. What is the primary function of an exhaust system in regard to safety? To provide protection against the potentially destructive action of exhaust gases. What are two types of reciprocating engine exhaust systems? The short stack system and the collector system. What type of exhaust system is used on turbocharged engines? The collector system. What material is typically used to make exhaust system muffler shrouds? Sheet stainless steel. What drawback when using collector type exhaust systems is more than offset when used on turbocharged engines? The loss of power due to exhaust system back pressure. Why is an exhaust system failure considered a severe hazard? It can result in carbon monoxide poisoning, loss of engine power, or fire. Why should lead, zinc, or galvanized marks not be made on exhaust systems? The marks cause a change in molecular structure when heated and will cause cracks. What is an indication of an exhaust gas leak? A flat gray or a sooty black deposit in the area of the leak. How are exhaust system internal baffles or diffusers inspected? The exhaust system is disassembled as necessary for visual inspection. How can failure of exhaust system internal baffles or diffusers cause a loss of engine power? by restricting the flow of exhaust gases. What happens to engine power when a heat exchanger leaks exhaust gas into the engine induction system? Loss of power. Where are exhaust manifold and stack failures usually found? At welded or clamped points and flanges. What is a common cause of turbocharger wastegate sticking? Coke deposits or carbon buildup. Why are turbocharged exhaust system leaks very damaging at high altitudes? Pressure differential will cause the leak to escape with torch-like intensity. What are exhaust system coke deposits? Excessive carbon buildup. What happens to turbine engine performance if the exhaust nozzle area is changed? The performance and exhaust gas temperature changes. What are the components of a typical turbine exhaust nozzle? A tail cone, exhaust duct, and support struts. What is the function of the thermocouple probes in a turbine exhaust tailpipe? To measure exhaust gas temperature. What change does a noise suppressor make to noise frequency in order to help reduce older turbojet engine noise? It converts low frequency sound into high frequency sound. What are the thrust reversers primarily used for? To aid in decelerating an aircraft after landing. Name 2 types of thrust reverser systems commonly used. Mechanical blockage, or clamshell. Cascade, or aerodynamic blockage. Are thrust reversers generally able to produce a maximum reverse thrust approximately equal to an engine's full forward thrust? No. An engine's full reverse thrust is usually substantially less than its full forward thrust. What are the hazards of operating some thrust reversers at low ground speed? Reingestion of hot exhaust gas, ingestion of foreign objects stirred up by the deflected exhaust gases. Propellers. How do you determine the repairability of a damaged propeller blade? By reference to the manufacturer's maintenance manual. What is the purpose of propellers? The blades produce forces that create thrust to pull or push the airplane through the air. What is a fixed pitch propeller? A fixed pitch propeller is one that has a built-in blade angle that cannot be changed. What type of blade angle change will occur on a propeller that is pitch controlled by a propeller governor during a constant power dive? The blade angle increases to overcome overspeeding. Other than maintaining constant speed, what are 2 actions of some controllable propellers? Reverse pitch and feathering. What is the purpose of metal tipping fastened to a wooden propeller leading edge and tip? To protect the propeller from damage. When engine vibration is reported, what should be checked to determine if it is caused by the engine or propeller? Blade tracking and blade angle setting. What is blade tracking? Blade tracking is determining the positions of the propeller blade tips in relation to each other. What may be used to determine propeller blade angle? A propeller protractor. How should aluminum propeller blades and hubs be cleaned? The propeller should be cleaned in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. What positions of a two-bladed propeller are used during a static balance test? Vertical and horizontal. What two forces are balanced in a propeller governor in an on-speed condition? Speeder spring and flyweight. On light aircraft propellers, what is the effect of centrifugal force acting on propeller blade counterweights? Centrifugal force acting on the counterweights serves to increase propeller blade pitch. What happens to a constant speed feathering propeller when the propeller governor oil pressure drops to 0? The propeller will feather. What three things does a typical constant speed propeller governor accomplish when operating? It boosts engine oil pressure before it enters the propeller hub. It controls the amount of oil that flows to the propeller. It senses the rotational speed of the engine. What types of systems are used for propeller ice control? Fluid, alcohol, and electrical. What type of non-destructive tests should be accomplished to a propeller after blending? The procedures recommended by the manufacturer. To what do the terms alpha range and beta range pertain? Both terms pertain to operating modes of turboprop reversible pitch propellers. What is the alpha range of a turboprop? The alpha range is operation in the constant speed mode, usually in flight. What is the beta range of a turboprop? The beta range is operation in the minimum or zero thrust and negative reverse thrust modes, usually for ground handling and taxiing. What is the purpose of an oil accumulator connected to a propeller governor? To provide unfeathering oil pressure. How is feathering accomplished on a constant speed propeller? Releasing the governor oil pressure allows the counterweights and feathering spring to feather the propeller. What are the two criteria used by many manufacturers to determine the amount of bend damage that can be repaired by cold bending of aluminum propellers? The extent of the bend, its blade station location. What may be used to remove repair marks from aluminum propellers? Very fine sandpaper. What can be used to clean a wooden propeller? Warm water and mild soap together with a brush or cloth. Auxiliary power units, APU. What is the function of an APU on model transport category aircraft? To supply ground electrical and pneumatic power to aircraft systems when the engines are not operating, and in some aircraft as a backup source of in-flight electrical power. Of what does a typical APU consist? A small turbine power plant with provisions for supplying bleed air, and an electrical generator that is usually identical to those mounted on the aircraft's engines. What usually places the greatest demand on a gas turbine APU? Bleed air loads. What is typically used to start an APU? Its own electric starter and battery power. What is the usual source of a gas turbine APU's fuel supply? One of the aircraft's main fuel tanks. At what speed does a gas turbine APU operate? An APU operates at or near its rated speed regardless of the electrical or pneumatic loads imposed. How is a heavily loaded APU approaching its maximum exhaust gas temperature prevented from overheating? By the use of a load control valve that modulates the pneumatic load to maintain a safe operating temperature. How is the cool down for many APUs accomplished prior to shutdown? by running the APU for a specified minimum period of time after closing the bleed air valve, unloaded. What is the operating effect of following a required cool-down period prior to APU shutdown? The APU's EGT is lowered and stabilized. How is an APU's operating speed maintained despite variations in the loads imposed? By the APU's fuel control automatically adjusting the fuel flow. Name at least 2 uses for APU-produced pneumatic power. Engine starting, ground air conditioning, anti-icing. What type of operating practice could cause thermal shock and possible damage to an APU? Abrupt shutdown of the APU when it is heavily loaded, not observing prescribed cool-down procedures. What powers the variable inlet guide vanes used on some APUs to regulate compressor intake airflow? Fuel pressure. How long is a typical APU cool-down period? 3 minutes. This concludes the FAA Powerplant study material for your oral exam. Good luck.